Welcome back. Yesterday we heard from the former Federal Reserve Chair, Greenspan. He spoke about the U.S. economy, and today he'll give his take on the Fed policy, at least what he thinks is going to happen. Today is part 2 of that interview. We'll also talk about his legacy in Washington and around the world. And I asked him which U.S. president he enjoyed working with the most.
In fact, it was Gerald R. Ford. I was chairman of the Council of Economic Advisors for 2.5 years, and we worked very closely together. It was my first real exposure to government. I was a private sector consultant who never thought I would get close to government. And I thought that Gerald Ford was considering so-called Watergate and the problems that emerged as a consequence of Nixon abdication, so to speak. You needed somebody to calm the country down, and he did, because he was a man of integrity. I don't think he could have gotten elected president of the United States himself, starting from scratch, because he wouldn't be doing the types of things that I think are required to become president of the United States. So I found dealing with him as a human being was a very encouraging, gave me a very encouraging view of the American system.
You left the private sector to come volunteer in many aspects to work in government. Of course, working in government is not easy, as you well know. Why did you stay as long as you did? And looking back, would you have done anything differently?
Oh, I mean, it's got a lot of problems, but it is fascinating. To be involved, I mean, for example, I mean, I've worked with so many extraordinary people. I've met virtually all of the critical heads of government, you learn how the world works. You see the people who are the most prominent positions of power in the world, and you realize they're human beings. They have flaws. They have characteristics which are extraordinary.
They're politicians, but they're still human.
Yes, I mean, for example, the two most intelligent presidents I worked for were Richard Nixon and Bill Clinton, two extraordinarily different people for so many different ways.
They're very different. They're very different ideologies.
Clinton was a Democrat and I'm a Republican, but we got along exceptionally well. He used to like to say we were the odd couple.
I have to ask you about some of the critics now.
By what means?
The critics say that you presided over the Federal Reserve during one of the greatest expansions in U.S. history, specifically the housing sector. Mm-hmm. Housing prices went up at an extremely healthy clip, almost as healthy as stock market prices. What do you tell those critics who said that you could have done more, perhaps?
Well, you'll find that the criticism does not occur at the time they're claiming the problems emerged, which I find very unusual. It's in retrospect that they look back. The argument that they're making is basically that we should have suppressed the prices of assets and the prices of homes, and we would have, and indeed we tried, but for example, we tried to stop the dot-com boom in 1993, 1994, and we failed. And the reason basically is, and I point out in the book, that the worst thing, that problem that confronts a central bank, and we used to talk about it quite often, is that if you have policy which is running too well, it's long-term growth, stable prices, it invariably will create a bubble. There is no way, given human nature, that you're going to stop that. As I said, we tried in 1993, 1994, 1995, and we suppressed it, and as soon as we stopped, it popped out. And what happened in 2003, which is the period they're saying that we lowered rates too much, was the fact that as a consequence of the end of the Cold War, there was an extraordinary shift in most of the then third world towards market capitalism, with China in the forefront. The extraordinary things that Deng Xiaoping and his subsequent followers did for China was to open up markets in a way which I'd never seen before. And you couldn't have the type of growth you're seeing if that were not the case. India shifted a great deal. But the whole point of all of those changes was to accelerate the rate of growth in the developing countries to a rate nearly twice that of the developed countries. But the cultures of those countries couldn't spend the monies that they were making, and hence savings became huge, spilled over into the world capital markets, and caused capitalization rates to move down, which meant prices of stocks, structures, everything went up. We had a housing boom in the United States, so did everybody else.
Your time in Washington, you have seen generations of politicians come through. What are your thoughts on politics today in America?
It's broken. I remember not that long ago, let me go back to the Gerald Ford example. Gerald Ford was a Republican, and Tip O'Neill, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, was a Democrat. And during 2.5 years, from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., they would clash outwardly and very publicly. At 5 p.m., Tip O'Neill would come over to the White House and have a bourbon with his old buddy, Jerry Ford.
Boehner's not doing that with Obama now.
That doesn't happen anymore. And up until recently, I mean, we had extraordinarily cordial relationships within the political system. We've lost it. And unless we can regain it quickly, we're going to have some serious problems.
That was former U.S. Fed Chair Alan Greenspan. For both parts of the interview and more, head to cctv-america.com for the full replay.